joining us. I know it's the last session, so we're ending on a positive one though. The shining stars of the north. So I've got some fantastic brands sat here with me today who are really leading in this category. So let's kick things off with a broad one. What excites you most about where retail media is headed and how it's changing the way brands think about their marketing mix? So Helen, let's start with you.
Yes, I think there's two things that really excite me. Firstly, it's probably data, the amount of data and how we can really use that data throughout all of our choices and how our brands show up. And then secondly is the scale and the speed of how it's evolving. I think particularly from an in-store point of view, I think the amount of opportunities, different touch points, and particularly the digitalisation of some of those touch points in store as well. I think the agility that offers brands to adapt, not necessarily wait your 12-week lead time for a piece of print, but just being a bit more agile. They're the things that really excite me. And I think the way that it's changing, the way that we think about the mix. So for us, it's very much, it's starting everything just much earlier in the process. So it's making sure that retail media and how we invest from a customer point of view is considered really early on. So we've just done a huge new brand campaign for Kellogg's cereal. We were looking at how do we show up in store with this new campaign 18 months ago, which is very new for us in terms of that timing. So yeah.
Yeah, that's very exciting. We don't often hear that 18 months out for a shopper, even with the 12-week print lead times. Matthew, what about you? What excites you most about retail media at the moment?
You will hear me. It's weird because we can't really hear each other.
We can't
hear the questions, so I'll probably repeat exactly what Helen just said. I think for me, I would take it as investment in total. So all the way from any way of reaching consumers or shoppers, thinking of all of that investment in one pot. I think that's what interests me most about retail media, because retail media is just one part of the total investment. And I think I'm fairly new to this, so I've been busily involving myself in sessions today. I've got a huge list of acronyms that I need to ask my team about, most of which I don't think I really understood. But what I do know is that it's quite complicated, and the more complicated you make it, the more difficult it is to access investment. So if you're a retail media network person here, try and keep it a bit simpler, particularly for the old fogies who at some point probably have to sign off the investment. So I think about it that way. But I'm excited about looking at it in all of the investment together and working out where you're going to get the best return to reach shoppers or consumers.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think, Helen, you hit the nail on the head with it being more than just kind of in-store, and obviously there's a lot of complexity that comes with that, Matthew. But Fiona, from your experience, what's kind of a standout example of a brand really pushing those boundaries within retail media? What's possible within the space?
Well, I think before I answer that, I do think when we think about the activation over the last 12 to 18 months, I think it has been absolutely incredible from brands. Like, it is super, super exciting. Maybe a bit sad of me, but I just love it. When you go into a store and there's like the full aisle takeover, the branded bays, like the way that we are trying to engage our shoppers. And particularly important for us as bakery, where you've got kind of that system one thinking and autopilot, like how do you speak to them differently and disrupt? If I had to think of a standout campaign, it would be the UK launch of Cheez-Its from Calanova. I think it was kind of a fully integrated, holistic campaign, completely unmissable. Like, I genuinely, everywhere I went, it was there, completely through the line. So everything from kind of TV, radio, there was a digital, the experiential was amazing. And then the in-store activation. And I particularly liked as well the bespoke customer activation that was done in Co-op with like the buy, scan, donate. I just thought that was great. And personally, I loved the tram wrap. It was brilliant.
Yeah, great news for you, Helen. Definitely got that brand out there. it's true, retailers are constantly sort of expanding what their media offering is, and not all RMNs are created equal. I'm going to come to you for this one, Kat, because you've kind of got a very unique perspective of being on both sides of the coin. What to you makes a retail media network really stand out to brands?
I think in like what the guys were just saying there's been so much development over the last few years with retail media networks, and there's so much competition between them now, which is great from a brand's point of view. But I think now we're starting to see the kind of like polarisation, and I think the best way I can think about that is kind of saying it's the guys who think of themselves as advertisers and the guys who still think of themselves as an extension of the retailer. And that's not necessarily criticism, because that revenue stream into the retailers are incredibly important, the businesses. But I think the retail media now needs to stand on its own 2 feet. So I think what I mean by that is I think there's probably 3 things in that. I think the targeted media options. Now, every retail media network offers some kind of targeting, but I think the guys now who are looking into that first-party data and making that accessible to brands at kind of a value level as well. And even if it's not first-party data, not everybody's got 30 years of club cards data available. But even if there's some kind of good segmentation of shoppers where you can actually think, right, well, I'm going to target that group. So I think that's the first thing. The second thing would be measurements. Going back 10 years, I think there was a myth around retail media that you couldn't measure it. I think we've done an amazing job as an industry to completely dispel that myth. But I think that's probably the next step in terms of the data that we get back as brands now. So not necessarily just test versus control, but I think if we can now get to that point where even if a campaign didn't work, if I know why it didn't work, that would really help me as well. So that that level of which shoppers have I brought into that brand by doing that campaign would be fantastic. And I think the other one is omni-channel. So again, every retail media network, you can kind of maybe cobble together a bit of an omni-channel plan, but I think the retailers that are winning now are the ones or the retail media networks that are winning now, are the ones who are really investing in that future. So I think a good example is probably Co-op Media Network, who are investing in the screens, dunnhumby and Netzer, who are invested in the connected TV. So where we can really get that targeted media that's measurable and bring it back into our businesses. But I'd say all of that really is tied together with the success of how retail media networks are linked or integrated into the retailer as well, and specifically the trading and marketing teams. I've worked on, I dread to think how many campaigns over the years, and the ones where the retail media network is so integrated and kind of checking in with the buyer, checking in with the marketing team on our behalf, that's the real success there. So I think you can really tell when a retail media network does that well.
Yeah, absolutely. It's all about collaboration and that power of 3, the retailer, the brand, the customer, and that piece about measurability. I think, there is a huge pressure at the moment to prove ROI. That's higher than ever. I guess, Fiona, what's the biggest shift that you've seen in terms of how brands are actually measuring success in retail media, and what do you think needs to improve?
Well, I guess coming at it from like a Warburton's angle, I think the measure of success completely depends on the objective of the campaign. So, for example, and I don't need to teach you guys this, if it was MPD and we're driving awareness and trial, as a team, we would look at percentage uplift, we would look at reach, maybe impressions, click-through rate, to Catherine's point, like who's buying the product and like potentially what's the halo impact. We'd all love to make a return on our investment, but I think like with MPD that will come later. With regards what needs to improve, I echo what's been said, which is that I think the post-campaign reports, so the PCRs, have definitely improved, and I do want to recognise that absolutely. But I think there's still some key areas that we need to address. So I think the big ones, it's really still the fundamentals. So by that I mean having the correct test and control measures in place at the start of a campaign. It's still happening where it's not the case, and we get to the end of the campaign, they're like, we've not set up the right measures, and it's like, great, we've missed our slot. Category benchmarks, with some retail media partners, that's still lacking, so we don't have that context, so it really does vary. I think timely and accurate PCRs, and I think the last one, which is always a hot topic, is compliance. It really does need to change. I think what we've seen is that with some of the retailers where they have moved over to plan apps, I think that has helped, because I think with that we've got streamlining, a bit more like standardisation, the measures and the benchmarks. But I think we are still seeing a bit of gap around education and capability. I think there is now, and I hope I'm okay saying this, but there's actually a lot on our account managers, because it's got much more complex and integrated. It's not just about the media and the campaign, but they're having to deliver the insights, the category, and it's that insight and that so what message that is critical. And when that's lacking, we do get quite frustrated as a team, because we want to know what the key takeout is. So in a perfect world, everybody would have exactly the same platform and technology, and we could measure everything like for like, or as close as.
Yeah, that would be the dream, right?
That is
being
the
able
dream.
to take that so
dream.
what. Yeah.
Yeah.
And just to add more into the mix, obviously we saw with the mesh research earlier about how it can drive brand metrics as well. So that's going to be starting to play more of a part, I think, as we go on. Retail media and creative have often felt like quite separate conversations. Matthew, are you, as brands, are you finally seeing the value of great creative in retail media? It's always been dominant in ATL, but how much of a part is it playing, and how can you share an example of where creative's made a real impact?
I've got a question for the audience first, though. Who has tried a Taylor's coffee bag? Hands up if you've tried a Taylor's coffee bag. That's encouraging.
Wow, that's
I'd say we've got about 50% of people who haven't, so they're the people we need to work on. So my example for creative is, so obviously Taylor's coffee bags, fantastic way of taking cafetiere experience but making it convenient. So that's the insight. What we were trying to do, we're trying to obviously get people to try the product. What we did with creative is we've got a flying start, which is obviously what it says on the tin, it's to get you going in the morning, and then Rich Italian, which is a later in the afternoon. And we switched our creative, the use of creative, based on a morning occasion and an afternoon/evening occasion. So I'd say we were able to be creative in the moment, and that was something that using retail media allowed us to do that we couldn't otherwise have done as slickly. So the 50% who didn't try it, see me afterwards for some free samples, or my team, some of my team Rich are at the back. Thank you.
Great, I look forward to that, Matthew. I will definitely be taking up those samples. Let's pivot a little bit and talk about full funnel. There's a lot of talk about how retail media plays into this, but it's still often seen as kind of a lower funnel, conversion-driven kind of channel. Helen, do you think that perception is shifting? And what's a great example of it being used for upper funnel success?
Yeah, I do think the perception is shifting, and I think it goes back to what excites me, I suppose, about retail media is around the data. And I think we've used the data, and it's really supported a lot of bigger conversations, I would say, from a colleague perspective with key stakeholders and when decisions are being made. It gives us more proof points, and it just means that it's much more comparable, and it's part of the conversation when we're thinking about where are we investing, how are we supporting, and what that mix looks like. I think it also then enables us to give senior stakeholders and other decision makers a lot more confidence in what we're doing, what it's returning, and the impact that it's having from a brand point of view. One of the examples of what I'm aware of, so I work on the cereal side of our business. I have an equivalent, and I've got Rui in the audience, who also is a key member of who launched Cheez-It. So Fiona, to your earlier point, Rui was very proud of that tram wrap as well. We saw it all over our WhatsApps. But Cheez-It, I think, is a great example, right? It's a brand new brand in the UK anyway. It's a $1 billion brand globally. But it was very much about needing to drive awareness of the launch of that brand and establish it. But what we did differently is we made sure that we had the right levels of investment throughout the whole of the funnel when we were launching Cheez-It. So over 50% of our brand building was in below the line. And through our Ipsos tracking and measurement, what we saw is that whilst we gained around 40% awareness of Cheez-It as a brand across our target market, what we then saw was that POS, and particularly the in-store element, contributed a comparable amount to the awareness of Cheez-It as our above the line in our AV plan. So really powerful and really evident of actually it is having an effect, and we are seeing it drive awareness as well as just what we would have traditionally said it was the role of particularly our below the line budget. And I think there's some things that kind of contributed to that. So one, it was the level of investment, so it was significant, which obviously helps. Secondly is just the sheer scale, and I think you touched on it, Fiona, it was everywhere. The amount of touch points that were used to bring that brand to life was significant, and the way that they contributed to driving that full awareness was huge. And then finally was the creative and that consistency of the creative. So just the red and the yellow, the eyes, some of the key distinctive brand assets that were everywhere throughout the whole of the funnel, through all of the comms, really contributed to that awareness as well.
Yeah, so just really consistent messaging throughout, which obviously worked for Fee in particular.
Yeah.
Talking about full funnel then, how is your business actually integrating retail media within the broader marketing mix, Fiona? So how are you using it to create more holistic omnichannel campaigns that meet both the brand and performance metrics? Or are you actually still seeing that a lot of the time, or most of the time, it's operating ATL and retail media in silos?
So it's a really interesting question. Our above the line and retail media, they do need to work together and complement each other, but the objectives of those can be very different. So for example, our above the line is all about long-term brand building. So if you've seen our Gold TV ads, that is about fame building. When you think about the retail media, traditionally this has been about creating an immediate reaction, so very much a short-term lens and super targeted, but both are equally important. And I think that where we can align and integrate them, we will. Example of that would have been our recent protein campaign. So objective-wise, it was about awareness, consideration, conversion. As Helen mentioned, we were the same in that we had the same creative throughout, but we just adapted it with different messages. So, at point of purchase, it's a strong call to action, for example. When we think about the touch points, there were lots throughout that customer journey, everything from kind of front of store activation, the trolley media, online digital, branded bays, and then we had our digital 6 sheets, and what we did there was, with regards to placement, we pretty much split it. So we had half was about broad reach, and then half was about that kind of close proximity to targeted stores. So we're really proud of it.
Yeah, it was a brilliant campaign. This is an interesting one because I think that a lot of retailers are moving towards this space, but are brands moving towards self-service control cap? Is there a strong need to just continue with the managed service expertise? What's your view?
It's a really interesting question, actually, because I think logically you would expect me to say yes. So if you could say, right, Catherine, I'll give you access to a portal where you can directly manage your campaign whenever you want to. You could potentially alter that campaign mid-flight to, get better results. You would totally expect me to say yes, I would want that, but I'm actually going to say no. And the reason for that is, I think Fiona touched on it earlier, was the complexity with what we're dealing with. So something that works in one retailer doesn't work in another. Something that works in one category doesn't work in another. And I think, like I said, the number of campaigns I've run across the year, I don't think I've ever ran two quite the same. There's always a new one. It's like, actually, with this MPD, we need to win in this customer, so your plan's already different. So I think you always need to, the best plans are always, you're collaborating on them anyway. But I think, especially with the complexity we've got in the market at the moment, before we see any consolidation, I think we're always going to need that experts at the Retail Media Network to support us to do that. We're bringing the expertise from the brands side. I think we still need that expertise from the retail media side as well to make that plan the best it can be. Interestingly, having worked with the Retail Media Networks as well, that's the only time I've heard that question asked. Fiona and I were talking about this previously, and I don't think as brands it's something we're demanding. I can totally understand the logic again from the retail media network side or the retailer side. Certainly, you're cutting out the middleman, you're saving on labour costs, potentially getting volume sales through that as well. So for some things like a simple banner or Barker or something like that, it might, something quite tactical, it might be okay. But certainly when you're building campaigns and you spend as much as the vast majority of our mortgages on a campaign, you want to kind of do that in collaboration and make sure it's the right thing and make sure you're bringing all expertise into that campaign, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And some of this stuff we've talked about, like the aisle takeovers and all those wonderful things we see in store, it'd be very difficult to execute, right? And especially,
I don't think I'd have the bravery to put complete.
Yes. And especially with, as you say, about bringing it all together and standardization. If we can't do that in measurement, are we going to be able to do that in self-serve?
Yeah.
Most likely it'll take some time, right? And it's interesting to hear, and I agree the brands I speak to are probably in the same camp as you.
Yeah.
All right, we've got one last question, so we're going to finish with a quick fire round. So, question for all of you. If we're sitting here in 12 months' time, what is the biggest topic that you think we'll be discussing in retail media? Matthew?
I think it's the scrap between the different types of media outlet. So you've got very traditional media and you've got retail media. And obviously, I think I was watching someone earlier who said that they thought by the end of this year there'll be more money spent in retail media than in traditional media. Now that doesn't sit well with quite a lot of vested interest, does it? And how those people fight back, particularly media buying agencies, what's their part in this? And as someone who's relatively new to this, I just find it really interesting to hear. You can just see the camps setting up, saying no, it's more valid, and you need to be on TV because it's the best way of reaching people. And then you're at an event like this, and people are saying no, that's complete rubbish. That's not the best way to reach people. You need to reach people through their journey. So I think that for me, that's what's coming. So more scrapping, and I don't understand why the prices keep rising in all of these things. If fewer people are watching TV, how can it be more expensive to use TV? So someone can explain that to me. Sort of inverted the laws of supply and demand. But maybe that's something for afterwards.
Yeah, it's a really interesting one. Fiona, I'm going to come to you. What do you think it will be?
I'll try and be really quick for 1 minute. Definitely AI, kind of goes without saying. I'd be really interested to know about digital media and how it's continued to expand. I, Mystic Meg, think that there will be new retail media networks in new channels established, thinking about what we've seen with Aldi, etc. That'll be really interesting. And then the last one, I was thinking that there might be new customer loyalty programs introduced, and I think the existing ones will just get even more sophisticated.
Helen?
I have a hope for 12 months. I hope that we'll be talking about the success of the Power of Three. So we talk about this quite a lot around how are we leveraging what we're doing, the knowledge we have, the investment that we're making. I think we're doing a good job from a supplier side in terms of making sure that our business understand what we're doing and why. And for example, our sales colleagues understand what our investment is and what it's delivering. I want to see that our customers and our commercial contacts, that our customers also recognise that investment, and the three of us can work better together. I think it's this standard bugbear that we always have with a lot of our customers, just around making sure that we're really leveraging it all together, because ultimately that's what's going to drive business performance.
It's always good to have a hope. And last but not least, Kat, what are your thoughts?
I would say two things. I think I agree with Fiona. I think we'll see a more of a proliferation of retail media networks, probably in less traditional channels like on-trade, discounters, wholesalers and things like that. So I actually think for us in the short term it'll get more complex for brands. My hope is that, similar to the question you asked Matthew earlier, actually, I think I'd love for this time next year for us to be discussing more about the creative side. I think we've done the media bit. I think we need to keep that drumbeat going, but I think the media does stand on its own feet now. And I think I did see something from SMG actually that was saying that about 50% of the success of a campaign is down to the creative. And I don't think as shopper marketeers we focus on that quite as much as we can. So I was determined not to mention AI here, but I do think AI will help us with that creative side now, because it's such a, there's so much to do there. So yeah, I hope that's what we'll discuss in this time next year.
Yeah, all really, really interesting thoughts, and thank you all for your time. I think we've all discovered that what it means to be the brightest shining stars of the North is all about omnichannel, great creative, and standardized measurement. Yeah?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.